Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. I'm glad, I hope you're just waking up, feeling refreshed, ready to begin a new day. Um, Excited about your Thanksgiving. Hopefully, you have some family, friends that you're going to gather with. We're busy here in a Borea household trying to get everything ready for family, friends, for everyone to come. So we should have a pretty full house. Um, on Thursday morning at 10 a.m. We're going to have a Thanksgiving service at Bethany, and I'm still going to do a an early morning, just seize the day, Thanksgiving Day, just to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, and just remind ourselves again of all the good reasons why we have to be thankful. This week I made a new friend. I always liked my little food processor, but when you have a lot of people coming and you're cooking a whole lot of food, to get all those things chopped and minced and pureed, and there is nothing like a really good food processor. So I am in love with my new processor, and I got this other little gadget that comes with really sharp blades, but you put it in, and it's almost like a guillotine. You can cube, you can slice, you can do a bunch of little things with the machine. So you don't have to pull out your food processor, but you just throw like take an onion, cut it in half, and you put it in this thing and just slam the top down on it, and it comes out in perfect little chunks. It's such a time saver. I mean, if I was to open my refrigerator now, you'd see all these neatly cut vegetables and everything ready to just start doing some of our favorite Thanksgiving recipes. So I'm on it, and I love my new food processor. I should do a commercial, but no, it's been awesome. Maybe some of you can share what your favorite recipes are. One year, my wife came and she decided that she was going to do a rendition on our stuffing recipe that she makes. She makes a sausage leek stuffing. It's really very good. And she decided to do this cornmeal and something else. And we're all really adventurous eaters in the house, but there's some things you just don't mess with. And sausage leek stuffing is one of them. And so she puts this on the table and we're all eating. It's pretty good. And we're like, okay, where's the stuffing? And she goes, well, I thought I would just mix it up this year. And I'm like, yeah, don't do that again, please. Like, because that's Thanksgiving. So I don't know what it is for you, but our sausage leek stuffing, that it's the bomb. And it's just not Thanksgiving without it. Yeah, and you have to have a lot of gravy too. Just throw that in there. Anyway, we've been on a study now in the book of Matthew. And in particular, we've been looking at a passage this week that's found in Matthew. We looked at 4 through 11, which was his temptation account. But we also now are kind of looking through this passage here in terms of a move that Jesus is going to make. And that move is going to be found in Matthew 4, 12 through 17. It's a text that begins to share with you and me that Jesus is moving from Nazareth to Capernaum. And as always, the backdrop for these texts, right, for you that we've been looking at, is always this text that should begin to remind us again that Matthew is writing, especially these first 4 chapters, to give us firm reasons why we should believe that Jesus is the Christ. And as a result of this, he has taken us on a really cool journey looking at Jesus's genealogy, various passages in the Old Testament from a number of books like Hosea, Micah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, all these books that are giving us insight into the birth of Jesus, and all of which so that we would come to a firm conviction that Jesus is the Messiah that God has promised. And so today we're going to take another look, and this is really the last passage that we're going to look in this series called Origin. We're going to resume our studies in the book of Matthew after the Christmas break, and we're going to get more into the teachings of Jesus and the miracles that he has performed, and why all of that is leading us again to a place where we should put our faith in Jesus without reservation. So I'd like to just bring you back to a couple of these passages that we looked at. One in verses 12 and 13 here in Matthew. It says, when Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he returned to Galilee, leaving Nazareth. He went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali. So here's a text, right? We begin to see some of the dark side in terms of what is taking place in the world during this, during the ministry of Jesus. Here we're hearing that John had been put in prison. Again, this coming of Jesus is in the midst of so much of the brokenness that's in the world around us. If you pay attention to many of the passages, you'll see it on every single page. It always astounds me when people talk about our faith as if we were having these rose-colored glasses on, where we're looking at the world only through a certain filtered lens. I don't know about you, but when I read the Bible, I see a lot of brokenness. I see a lot of hostility. I see some of the acts of our human nature just rising to the surface and being the cause for so much anxiety and angst that we feel in the world right now. So when you look at this passage, you see that John now has been put in prison, and now Jesus is leaving Nazareth, and he's this small, obscure little town, and he's going to go to live by this land of Zebulun and Naphtali. I mentioned yesterday this map, and in this map, what I'd like for you to really pay attention to, and I'll blow this up for you just a little bit more. When you see this map, all the various colors represent the 12 sons of Jacob. This was the land of Israel as it was divided amongst the 12 tribes. And you see this big brown area called East Manasseh. You have West Manasseh, right? So the dividing line was the sea, that was the Jordan River that separates these lands together. On the top is the Sea of Galilee. On the bottom here is the Dead Sea. So when it says that Jesus moved to Cana in the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, well, see, here is that up on the top in the center here, on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, you have Naphtali that you could see kind of borders much of the western shore of the Galilee, and Zebulun is nestled right underneath Naphtali. So if you look at this land then in Jesus's day, this is the land now, and I just blew it up to show you that this is the area of Galilee with Upper and Lower Galilee. Nazareth is there in the center, and Capernaum is going to be on nearly the top of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus is going to have much ministry around this area, and many teachings, opportunities that he's going to speak to people. But this is the land then that we are speaking about. So Matthew uses this then as an opportunity to speak, and what is he going to tell us? He says Jesus's move from Nazareth to Capernaum was to fulfill what the prophet Isaiah, what was said through the prophet Isaiah, land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, the way to the sea, along the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people are living in darkness have seen a great light, and on those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. So here we have this passage, and you see that a reference then now is being made to a text that's found in Isaiah. And in Isaiah, we're gonna look at this particular text is in Isaiah verses 1 through 2, and and so I'm just going to put this up here so that you can see this as well. So the Isaiah 9 1 through 2 is this text that you see Matthew referring to in the scripture for this morning. This text, by the way, is written, like I said, Isaiah was a prophet who prophesied more than 700 years before the birth of Jesus. So Matthew's going way back now and equating the move of Jesus from Nazareth to Capernaum. And in that area, he looks at that as a fulfillment now of what Isaiah said. So what is being fulfilled here? Notice that Jesus's move is being equated with a great light, right? A light that is dawning. And where is it dawning? It's dawning on people living in darkness, people living in the shadow of death. Matthew is quoting this hundreds of years later. And so the metaphor here is people living under the fall, right? That we're dealing with a world that is broken, that there are elements of that and fissures that you see throughout, civilizations and nations, right? The world in which we're living. I mean, today you and I, we wake up and yesterday we read of this tragedy again in Wisconsin, where a man drives a van into a Christmas parade, killing 5 and putting children and other young people in the hospital. It's just so sad to think that people would be moved to such evil, such violence. And yet this is the world in which we're living. There is a darkness that's in the world. And now what Matthew is saying is that Jesus, his move to Capernaum, into this land of Zebulun, Naphtali, a land that had been filled with promises that God had made, his move there has triggered Matthew to go back to this text and says, this is what God was talking about when he says the people living in darkness have seen a great light, that the people living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. So I thought it would be good for us then to go back to these passages and maybe take a little look and see really what is being spoken about here. So what I'd like for us to do now is just to take a moment and look at these passages together and see if we might be able to gain some more insight. Remember, this passage from Matthew 4:12 through 17 was really quoting Isaiah 9 1 through 2. So what I'd like to do now this morning is to just talk to you a little bit about what did it mean when he said the people were living in darkness. They were living in the shadow of death. Like what is Matthew trying to reveal to us in this passage regarding Jesus? Because what he's saying to us is, I'm going to share something with you that should give you, again, some more support into why you should believe that Jesus is this coming Messiah. Because if you do, all the promises that come by virtue of Jesus, him being this Messiah, is for your benefit. So here, what I'd like to do is take you back to Isaiah chapter 8. So we're gonna look here at Isaiah chapter 8, And there's a couple of verses here that I would just like to bring to your attention. One of the things that you need to recognize is that this land of Zebulun, Naphtali, right? That northern part of Israel that now was going to be, that is being referred to in Matthew's gospel. This land, during the days of Isaiah, was about to be overrun. They were going to be overrun by the nation called Assyria. Syria is going to come, and right now there is a lot of internal struggle. There is a great deal of external pressure being put on them by the Assyrian nation, all of which because the people have demonstrated an unfaithfulness towards God that he had been speaking to them about over and over and over again, and now raises his prophet Isaiah to give them this warning that judgment is coming. And so you get this idea then of the people living in darkness, the people in the shadow of death. It's because they are on the brink of being overrun by a hostile nation. And all of this is orchestrated as a judgment for the way in which the people have been living, the way in which they have unjustly been treating one another. And God is saying, yeah, judgment time has come. And so notice what this says here in Isaiah 8, 9, and 10. He says, raise the war cry, you nations, and be shattered. Listen, all you distant lands. Prepare for battle and be shattered. Prepare for battle and be shattered. Devise your strategy, but it will be thwarted. Propose your plan, but it will not stand, for God is with us. God is with us is that Hebrew word, Emmanuel. Emmanuel is in their midst. And now, notice everything here. This is really like a taunt. He's saying you could do all the preparations you want. You can raise the war cry. You could prepare for battle. You could devise your strategy. You could propose your plans. But I'm telling you, it's going to come to naught. You're going to be shattered. Your plans will not stand. Your strategies, they're going to be thwarted. Why? Because God is saying, I am behind all of this. And it's not going to stand because God has pronounced his judgment on this nation. Then the Lord seems to take Isaiah and pulls him to the side, and he says to him, the Lord spoke to me with a strong hand upon me, warning me not to follow the way of this people. So there is Isaiah the prophet now speaking to the people of Israel, and God saying, I don't want you to follow their example. And then God goes on to say, Isaiah goes on to say this. He says, the Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. And he will be a sanctuary. You notice here that there is this a choice that is being made. He's telling him not to follow the way of this people. Don't follow them in their folly. Don't follow them in their rebellion. Rather, make sure that God is the one who has your full attention. He's the one who is holy. He's the one that we are to reverence. The word fear there is also the one of reverence, but he adds this note of dread because God is able to judge the evil that's in the world. And one day we will stand before a holy God. And yet God is saying to Isaiah, I could be a sanctuary for you. I could be a safe place. But then he goes on and he says this. He says, but for both houses of Israel, because Israel is divided at this time, that map that I showed you, there it would be broken into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And so right now, the northern kingdom of Israel is about to be overrun by Assyria. But Isaiah is also going to go on to tell us that Babylon is going to be raised up, and Babylon is going to not only overcome Assyria, but he's going to overcome all the rest of Israel, to the point where the temple is going to be destroyed, people are going to be exiled. It's going to be one of those moments in Israel's history that is constantly going to be referred to. But here, God is saying, look, I'm a sanctuary. But for both houses of Israel, what does he say? I am going to be a stone that causes men to stumble, a rock that makes them fall. And for the people of Jerusalem, he will be a trap and a snare. Many of them will stumble. They will fall and be broken. They will be snared and captured. You realize then that God is this is being used as this point of decision. You come to me, and you can find in me a sanctuary, a safe place for you to dwell. But you reject me and my ways, and what you'll find is you're going to be tripping over me all the time. I am going to be the stone that causes people to stumble, the rock that makes them fall. And they will find themselves being trapped and ensnared, all because what? Of the way in which they are relating to God. Can you just stand back for a moment and recognize what God is saying here in these texts? It's a decision time. Israel is being pressed to say either I am for him or my life is against him. That's the choices that we find even in this day. In fact, you want to know what's really interesting? This passage that I'm reading to you now from Isaiah chapter 8, and if you look at verse 14, where it says that God will be a stone that causes men to stumble and a rock that makes them fall, that text will be applied by the Apostle Peter in his letter when he refers to the work of Jesus. Because Jesus is going to be that refuge for those who put their trust in him. But those who reject him, he says he becomes that stumbling stone, that rock that makes them fall. And they're going to stumble, and they are going to fall and be broken. They will be judged as a result of what we do with Jesus. That's why this Bible study, it's not just to inform our heads of spiritual truth. It's also to make sure that we are capturing our hearts, because God is pushing us in a direction to say we need to make decisions about who Jesus is. He goes on and he talks about in verse 18 of chapter 8 that therefore he stands, and as well as the children that the Lord has given him, as signs and symbols in Israel from the Lord who dwells on Mount Zion. So it's like the prophet Isaiah and those who are following after this message that Isaiah is delivering, they become signs and symbols to the generation that are around them. Does that not sound so familiar when we think of what God is calling us in the New Testament? That famous verse, right, where he says, you are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good work and glorify your Father who is in heaven. See, you and I now are God's representatives in the world. The Apostle Paul will call us ambassadors of hope. So here we're going back hundreds of years ago, but the world doesn't change that much, right? People still caught up in their own ways and their own rebellion against God. God is offering them a solution. He's telling them, choose me and you find a safe place. Reject me and you're going to stumble and fall. It's going to lead to your brokenness and capturing. And sure enough, all the plans that they have, they think they're going to fare well, but it doesn't work out that way. Look here in verse 19 and 20. He says, when men tell you to consult mediums and spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, they have no light of dawn. Notice the light of dawn is referring to this word, and that word is referring to the law and the testimony. That's Isaiah's way of referring to the Holy Scriptures. the law that Moses gave, the testimony of all the prophets. So when you go back and you open up your Old Testament, that's what this is referring to. It's saying, why are you looking to mediums and spiritists to give you direction? Why are you asking dead people to lead you into your future? Why not consult and inquire of God, who is more than willing to give you insight and wisdom so that you could live life well, who is providing us with direction and guidance so that we might walk in his ways and be assured that God could be that sanctuary for us. He says, why are we looking in other directions? Because when you do that, when you reject this word that I'm giving you, when you're basing your life on something other than what I am sharing with you, do you realize there is no light in that? You are, just like he says, stumbling in the darkness. And man, that could be a terrible place. You could feel so overwhelmed. You're so susceptible to the turning of events. There is no peace in that. There is this constant churning that takes place. And for those, like, come on, how many times have you found yourself perhaps in circumstances when you have gone your own way, try to do your own thing, make the best decisions you can, and then because of circumstances even beyond your control, it all comes crashing down on one place or another? Because see, we're always trying to do that. We're always trying to find our own way, and we're rejecting the way in which God has given. Don't you see that is at the heart of why this judgment is on the world? Going way back to Genesis, God created a world where humanity was to rule over them. This was a kingdom that God has established and placed you and me as princes and kings and queens to reign over this land as co-regents with him, representing him in the world. And yet, because of the disobedience of Adam, Eve, it plunges all of humanity, and we have been pursuing our own way ever since. And what is God saying to you and me? You persist in that way, there is no light of dawn. What's the result of that? Look what he says here. People are distressed and hungry, and they will roam through the land. When they are famished, they will become enraged, and looking upward will curse their king and their God. They will look toward the earth and see only distress and darkness and fearful gloom, and they will be thrust into utter darkness. Do you see the result of going your own way, of disregarding God and his call on our life? Look what it leads to. It leads to these feelings of being distressed and hungry. God promised to provide, and yet in their actions, God's hand of provision has been removed, and in its place, he says, look, you're making your decisions, now live by those decisions. And look what happens. They find themselves at war with Assyria. Assyria comes down, and it's going to be just a terrible place. They're going to roam throughout the land because what? Everything is destroyed. And in that place, they're going to be famished. And because they're so hungry and distressed, look, they become enraged. But notice what they do with this rage. Instead of bringing it to a place where they are humbled, what they do is they curse their king and their God. They begin to point the finger upward instead of recognizing that the fingers ought to be pointing back towards them. And yet when they look out on the world around them, what do they see? But only distress and darkness and gloom. And they're thrust into darkness. See, that's why then, in the midst of all of that, Isaiah then refers back to, he adds these words here in chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. And these are the words, right? These are the words that we found also being given to us in Matthew 4, 12 through 17. what does he add to this condition? He says, nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. See, God's looking now and speaking in the past tense about something that he's going to do for the nation of Israel. He's looking forward and saying, what you're experiencing now, there's going to come a time where there's going to be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled, notice what he says here, he humbles the land of Zebulun and Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the Gentiles by way of the sea along the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. You see, this word of Isaiah was given to a people who were about to be overwhelmed. Jesus is now, Matthew takes these verses and applies them to the coming of Jesus. And the implication is Jesus is now this great light that has come into a dark world. Jesus is the light that is about to dawn on a world that is held under the shadow of death. But there's a lot more that comes from this text. And I want to spend a few more days talking about that with you. But you notice in the midst of all of God's judgment, there is always this note of grace. It's never too late, my friends. It's always the opportunity. That's why they call it the present, because it's what God gives to you. It's a gift. And he says, just follow me. I am that sanctuary for you. So I trust that you recognize that God is always for us, not against us. And my friends, spend the day thinking of the grace that God has bestowed on us in the person and in the knowledge of his son, Jesus. It'll inform your life. It'll provide boundaries for you to make, good decisions. It'll give you the hope of a future. I hope you go and seize the day, remembering that God is good all the time. Thank you so much for coming. I love being a part of our community. And as I always say, Lord willing, we'll spend more time again tomorrow. God bless. And take out that food processor. Make your job a little easier. God bless.